What she meant is that the multitasking will at this point involve moderating the session. And let me invite the members of the panel in the order in which they're listed in the program to come serially and make their presentations. I want to tell the audience something that only Professor Mohamed knows. We've employed technology at its maximum, and any member of the panel who goes more than 7.5 minutes, there is going to be a technological zap that allows you to remember that you should be winding down and not going to 8 or 9 minutes. After we shall have heard each of the presenters, we'll come to the second part of the discourse, which is hearing comments and questions. And I'll tell you then what the modus operandi for that component will be. So please join me in welcoming Professor Mohamed to deliver her initial remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Griffith. Since I set these rules, which are usually difficult for panelists to follow, I have no choice but to follow my own rules now and see exactly how easy it is to speak and say everything in 7 minutes. I'll get to it. So the first thing I'd like to ask members of the audience to do is to turn to the person next to you and look at them, really look at them. But not yet, listen now. Look at them. I'm going to say stop and start, so just wait. No, seriously. So I want you to turn to the person next to you and look at them, and then when I say start, and then when I say stop, you stop. But here's what you're going to try to do when you're looking at them. Look at anything you want, with respect. But really, what I'm going to ask you to try to do is when you look at the person, to try to not see their color, the shape of their nose, or their hair, right? To try and see something that you can describe this person by other than what they physically look like, okay? And we're going to do this for 15 seconds just because I don't have a lot of time. So let's go. And don't cheat. Stop. How many people were able to achieve that? Oh my gosh, right? It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, right? To look beyond a person and see them for who they are rather than how they present. This is because humans seem to be primed to immediately recognize physical characteristics in each other. And this in itself is not problematic, but when we begin to use these markers to make decisions and oppressive, discriminatory decisions, then we can move into seriously dangerous waters. Now, we may ask if people are using physical markers in this country to make decisions. And a lot of what I'm going to speak to you about this afternoon is really about the research that me and my students have been doing over the past 10 years since I've been back in Guyana. The answer is yes. And let me share with you some of the data that we've collected. 51% of respondents in a survey done in 2010, repeated in 2012, so I'm going to give you the 2012 data readings, responded that the first thing they noticed about a person is their perceived race, characterized by 3 external markers: skin color, facial features, and hair texture. And that's why I asked you to try that simple exercise just now. Because as soon as somebody walks in, we presume that this is who they are based on what they present. Now, my mother, who is what they call a red woman in this country, used to respond to people with a long lecture when they asked her how she got the name Mohammed, right? So that kind of informs the kind of complexity of trying to figure out people's race from their name and how they look. Back to the data. 14% of the people surveyed said they make business decisions based on the perceived race of the other person. I wouldn't go into what that is, what those decisions were, but some of them would startle you because that would take my whole 7 minutes. 47% of them said race ranked among the top 3 attributes when they were looking for an intimate partner. So, a lot of the data, the literature will tell you that if you want to understand social distance and want to understand how integrated and how really liberal people are and accepting, is to put somebody of a different race to marry them or their close relative, and then you will see exactly what is operating, what's the operating system that is really under there. It therefore seems that for a good many Guyanese, race still does matter. But the notion of race is highly problematic and growing increasingly so in the face of modern science, where the Human Genome Project is undermining the idea that how a person looks can really tell who they are. Even if we were to accept the highly problematic notion of racial purity, another serious problem with making decisions about the perceived race of a person might arise. For instance, perceived race strongly depends upon the ability of the perceiver to accurately identify those physical features which are believed to belong to one pure race. In Guyana, things are further complicated by 2 demographic facts about the mixed population. The first is that in 1823, before the abolition of slavery in Guyana and the commencement of indentureship, the mixed population of Guyana was around 23%. Since independence, there has been a steadily growing mixed population recorded in the Guyana census. This challenges the factual basis for strong notions of racial purity as integral to a modern Guyanese identity. Who we are has very little to do with our skin. But too many people still fall prey to this deceptive shortcut that how we look accurately depicts who we are and how we're expected to live. Here I want to demonstrate how ridiculous we're all being when we buy into some myths about race in the world. And I promise you this is the last thing I'll ask you to do before I finish my presentation. How many people in the room has ever seen a black man? Put your hand up high. Take it down, right? How many people in the room have ever seen a white woman? Black, white, right? I am very sure that we have not seen any people in the world looking like this. Right? Good. But yet we walk around and we buy into the myth of white and black. And really and truly, talking about black and white and what this says psychologically to people, and what it says, what we actually mean, and what we trigger in the minds of people when we represent people as black and white in the world, is a whole other conversation. But I'm just going to leave it there for now. Though skin color is an uncontrollable biological fact, the idea that the color of a person's skin is an indicator of who they are has persisted in Guyana as a powerful social and political marker, pinning us to imaginary places which have real individual and national consequences. Guyana's race problems are rooted in a destructive system of values created by colonizers who erroneously and deliberately equated closeness to paleness to human attributes such as intelligence and spirituality, and other important social attributes such as morality and class and human rights. Exploiting natural external physical differences which arose only because of the interaction between humans and their physical environments over thousands of years, a business case was made that facilitated the continuous exploitation of colored peoples of the world as free or low-wage labor. These peoples were displaced from ancestral lands or transported through enslavement and indentureship for several hundred years. What was taught and learned during the dark ages of Guyana's early history has not been easy to unlearn. But groups are also important to people's social identity. A person's social identity consists of aspects of the person's individual self-image that they derive from social categories to which they perceive they belong. Groups may have a history of highly emotional interactions, in some instances conflict. They usually have salient clues for social categorization, such as race, sex, and age, and they may also be segregated in space. In addition, cultural norms may contribute to the perception of deep differences, and this to the learned biases and stereotypes, when they are added, which are acquired through socialization, become clear as to how strong intergroup biases can be. A political party is a type of social group, a group that happens to be political. Attachment to the group is therefore psychological and not necessarily political. A person thinks politically as he is socially for his vote. Identification is identified as feeling the effects of positive and negative outcomes for the group as though they were one's own. This is different from empathy, which is feeling exactly what others are feeling. Political power is therefore derived from a degree of self-sacrifice one will endure for the perceived general good of the group. This may explain why people continually return parties whose policies they may not benefit from directly. Whereas a politician may view the act of voting as an instrument for gaining office, an ordinary citizen may view the act of voting as an opportunity to express values and beliefs learned long ago. The paramount concern of the voter, according to this model, is not whether his party has any chances of governing, but rather in the expression of this political outlook which has developed through his or her lifetime. The very nature of elections is based on a competitive model of win-lose propositions. As such, politicians may feel constrained to exploit existing divisions. Thus, the very nature of elections or political processes promotes categorization and division. Inasmuch as parties compete for votes, they can cause or exacerbate divisions between groups by espousing values and positions that are decidedly partisan, such as pro-race slogans. My personal feeling is that there are many, many, many other less nationally destructive variables which can be used in this competitive construct, and I would challenge our leaders and would-be leaders to find them. There are several other theories, but I will focus on those for now. And go back to a particular study, and close there, that we did about 2 years ago. It can be argued that problems of cohesion, characterized as unwillingness to integrate between ethnic groups, and by eruptions of racial animosity and violence at times, have been the major challenge to Guyana's development over the last 50 years of its independence. The chain of events has produced a national context in which divisive politics overrides pragmatic politics. Political blocs have historically organized around ethnicity and not around common social and economic needs and interests. Allocation of power is derived through political means that is driven by resource allocation, largely around the same fault lines as racial divisions. And these will produce distinctly unequal material and social development. It will create in the population a sense of relative deprivation, which arises in such conditions and fosters further resentment between groups, and which widens historical, social, and political fissures. This leads to dissipated political energy, diluted civic action, and reduced effort on social and national goals and interests. In other words, any national interest is subordinated to the narrow personal and political ones of the day. The bottom line is, while certain power blocks progress, the whole country will not if we continue to do this. In my research, There are a few things that I'd like to point out in closing, because I think it's really important for us to understand how young people in particular, with whom I've been working, see race in the country and how they feel about their interactions with others. So I'll skip to this point. In the research that we did a year ago, which produced a report called Living Together, young people indicated that there were 19 fears that had to do with relationships with others, many of which underpin the discussion about race. And I'd like to share those with you, because I believe that if we understood how they felt in Guyana, we will begin to understand what we need to do to undo the wrongs that we have been living in and perpetuating. There's the fear of the other, fear of being alienated from one's own group if one steps out and reaches out to others, fear of being alienated, fear of fostering relationship with others perceived as different in the face of relative ignorance of how others live and who they really are, fear of being misunderstood by others, fear of being harmed in various ways other than by criminal activity by others, such as being charged different rates for the same goods in marketplaces, fear of crime because of their perceived race, fear of victimization because of their perceived race, fear of reaching beyond the known and comfortable, fear of trusting people who they don't know well, fear of never having enough materially, the fear of stepping out of line, fear of speaking out about what they think about race, fear of reprisals if they do something, fear of nothing happening if they do something, and fear of not being valued and of being powerless, maligned, and marginalized. This is what our young people, about 2,000 of them online and face-to-face, said about how they feel they're being dealt with in this country and what do we need to overcome in order for them to really be able to integrate with each other. But they didn't stop there. There were 5 items, general items, that they indicated they thought would make Guyana a better place and would really help us to move past the divisiveness that really bothers them. One is to facilitate respect for diversity and productive relations between all Guyanese in all parts of the country, including the diaspora. The second, to promote and drive equitable distribution of all commons in Guyana with its residents in the country. The third is to support a model of good governance in and between public persons, public institutions, and relations between public officials, as well as public officers and citizens. The fourth is to foster citizen security and security of all forms across the country. And this did not mean physical security only. I want to make the point, as we are planning for oil and all the other wonderful natural resources in the country, that the greatest renewable resource this country has ever had is its people and its young people. And we have to do something with regard to making sure that this resource is nurtured. So when we talk about security, we're not only talking about material security and like guns and security forces, we're talking about a welfare. What are we doing for people's welfare in the country? Old people, people who are falling through the net. Finally, to encourage public participation at community and national levels at all Guyanese, regardless of any group affiliation or self-distinguishing identification, shall be able to participate. To leave with you in closing these things, I ask you to look beyond what is presented before you to the operating system. It doesn't matter how the person looks. What are they doing? Think about how they are inside and the conditions of their lives, and see them as Guyanese. Secondly, to understand that race is never about race. Race is about resources and power. And that's what's presented before you. But the operating system is really about these structures of who gets what, when, and how much. Work on yourself and uncover and dismantle the myths. Never see a white person as white or a black person as black. See all people, as humans. Understand that diversity is a great creative force and that difference should never lead to discrimination. And remember, always think about this. Over 50 years ago, the founders of this nation set forward an aspiration that we should never forget in the face of any pressure, any rhetoric, any enticement, or any mystification. We should never lose sight of the fact that they chose this national anthem with these words, which we sang today and we sing all the time. Maybe we don't live them, we sing them, but we don't really recall and understand what they mean. I want to recall two of these lines, that aspiration of 52 years ago that we need to recall and live by. One land of 6 peoples, united and free. May we evermore be worthy of our heritage. My land, your land, Guyana, the free. Thank you.